In the winter of 2003, on the frozen edge of an Alaskan town, people began to hear something in the dark. A howl, long, low, and aching, carrying across the ice of a glacier lake, night after night. It was the sound of a wolf, utterly alone, calling for a family that would never answer. But this wolf would not stay alone. Instead, he would do something no wild wolf is ever supposed to do. He would walk toward the very thing his kind fears most, toward people, toward their dogs, toward their town. And he would ask, in his own way, to belong. They would come to call him Romeo. And for 6 unforgettable years, a wild black wolf became part of a human community in a way the world had never seen. This is his story. It began with a death. In April of 2003, near the Mendenhall Glacier on the edge of Juneau, Alaska, a black female wolf was struck by a taxi. She did not die at once, and she could not be saved. She had been pregnant, carrying a litter of pups that would never be born. She belonged to a small local pack, and after she was gone, the wolves that remained seemed to scatter and fade. That winter, the people living near the glacier began to hear a single wolf howling across the lake. One voice, alone in the cold. No pack answered, no mate replied. Just that one black wolf calling into the silence over the ice. A young male, perhaps the last of his family left in the valley. He had lost everything, and he was looking for something to fill the silence. Then, on a winter day, a local man changed the story forever, without meaning to. His name was Nick Janz, a wildlife photographer who had spent decades in Alaska, a man who knew wolves well enough to fear for them. He was out near the glacier with his dog, a yellow Labrador, when a young black wolf appeared, and the wolf came toward them. The Labrador slipped free and ran straight at the wolf, 100 pounds of wild predator. Nick's heart must have stopped. This was the moment a wolf kills a dog. But it didn't happen. The two animals met just feet apart. No aggression, no fear. They studied each other with pure curiosity. And then the wolf did something extraordinary. He wagged his tail. He bowed down on his front legs, the universal invitation every dog knows. He wanted to play. In that moment, Nick Janz understood he was seeing something almost impossible. A wild wolf choosing of its own free will to be friendly. Not tamed, not fed, not trapped, simply reaching out. The wolf especially loved that yellow Labrador. He would pace and whine with excitement at the sight of her, desperate to play, throwing himself into a joy that looked almost heartbreakingly human. Watching that longing, Nick's wife gave the wolf a name for a creature so full of love and yearning. Romeo. It fit instantly, and it stuck, because that's what he was. A romantic in the oldest sense, a soul reaching across an impossible divide, looking for connection where none should have been possible. Word spread fast. There was a friendly wild wolf at the edge of Juneau, and to everyone's astonishment, Romeo stayed. Most wolves who let themselves be seen melt back into the wilderness. Romeo did the opposite. He laid claim to a territory that overlapped Juneau's most popular recreation area, the trails, the lake, the edges of people's backyards. He became, in the truest sense, the community's wolf. Day after day, he met the people of Juneau and their dogs on the ice. He had his favorites. Certain dogs he greeted like old friends, racing and playing with them across the frozen lake. He learned faces. He learned routines. Some mornings he simply waited, as if for company. Over 6 years, Romeo would interact with hundreds of dogs and the people who loved them. Locals walked their pets out onto the glacier, knowing a wolf might come bounding over to say hello. It should not have been possible. And yet, there he was, a wild wolf who had chosen a town for his pack. There is one memory that captures what Romeo truly was. Nick Janz once described lying out on the frozen lake, his head resting on his pack, his own dog's head on his knee, and Romeo lying just 15 feet away. A wild wolf, a dog, and a man, all stretched out together on the ice. And they slept. All of them, trusting each other enough to close their eyes in the cold sunlight and simply rest. A wild predator and a human being sharing a quiet afternoon nap on a glacier, as if the ancient war between them had never existed. Think about what that means. Everything in a wolf's instinct says to fear man. Everything in a man's history says to fear the wolf. And here they were, asleep beside each other. Because somehow, against every rule of nature, they had learned to trust. Those who lived through it called those years a magical time, a gift, a chance to know a wild animal more deeply than they ever believed they could. But not everyone saw a gift. To some in Juneau, a 100-pound wolf living among children and pets was not a wonder. It was a threat waiting to happen. They worried. They grumbled that wolves and civilization don't mix. A few said openly that the wolf should be removed. Or worse. Never mind that in 6 years, Romeo never seriously harmed a single person. Statistically, he was less dangerous than a great many of the everyday things people never think twice about. But fear doesn't listen to statistics. And the people who loved Romeo carried a quieter fear of their own. They knew Alaska. They knew the truth that Nick Janz had understood in the very first instant he saw the wolf. That a wild animal this trusting, this visible, this close to people, was a wolf living on borrowed time. They tried to protect him from his own gentle nature. They banged ski poles together to drive him back. They shouted, waved, threw chunks of ice. Anything to keep him wild, to keep him wary, to keep him alive. But Romeo only ever wanted to be near them. And in the end, that was the very thing that could not save him. In September of 2009, after 6 years, Romeo vanished. For a while, those who loved him let themselves imagine a peaceful ending. The wolf slipping back into the mountains at last, living out his days somewhere wild and free. But that is not what happened. Romeo had been illegally killed, shot by men who had no reason and no right. The same trusting nature that had made him a friend to an entire town had made him an easy target for those who did not see a friend at all. He was around 8 years old. The men were eventually caught, undone by their own boasting, but the punishment that followed amounted to almost nothing. A wrist slap for the killing of the most beloved wild animal Alaska had ever known. After 6 years of trust, the wolf who had chosen friendship was gone. The town that had welcomed Romeo now grieved for him. They held a memorial service out by a great rock near the lake, the place where so many had met him, where he had played and rested and waited for his friends. People gathered to remember a wild animal who had, impossibly, become one of them. And they did not let the world forget him. 7 years after his death, Romeo came home. A bronze memorial in his likeness was carried back to the shores of the lake where he had once roamed. A wolf cast in metal, head raised, returned to the mountain water that had been his world. An overflowing crowd came to see him take his place. Emotion hung thick in the air. Romeo had come home at last. So what do we make of a wolf like Romeo? He broke every rule we thought we understood. He was wild, and yet he chose us. He had every reason to fear humanity. He had lost his family at the edge of our world. And still he walked toward us, tail wagging, asking only to play. For 6 years, he gave an entire town a glimpse of something most people never witness: the possibility of peace between our kind and the wild. He asked for nothing but companionship. He offered nothing but trust. And though that trust cost him his life, it could not erase what he left behind. Because everyone who lay on that ice beside him, everyone who watched him race across the snow with their dog, everyone who heard his howl roll across the lake, they were changed by him. They learned that the line between the wild and the tame is not as fixed as we believe. Romeo was not supposed to exist. A wild wolf who chose love over instinct, who chose a town for his pack. But he did exist, and for 6 shining years, he reminded a small Alaskan community, and now the world, of what is possible when we choose trust over fear. If his story moved you, there's more of the wild waiting for you, every week, right here. Subscribe and walk these trails with us. Until then, listen for the call of the wild.